Let's now discuss sessions and managing state. So as you may know, because the web is stateless, we need some way to maintain information about a user and their actions or their information. In Laravel, we can use the session helper to allow for this. So if I go to config session, here is the default config, and you can review this on your own time. Likely you won't need to tweak it other than the default driver that you want. So again, like most components in Laravel, session handling can be achieved in any number of ways, whether through writing and fetching from a file, using an encrypted cookie, storing it in a database, using Redis or Memcached, or even a simple array for testing. Now, what's nice about this is you can use the same API in your source code, and then if you want to switch to a different implementation, like maybe from Memcached to Redis, all you have to do is change your underlying driver within your .env file. Very cool and very powerful. So again, if we switch back, by default, it's using the file driver. This is good for local. This means all session data will be written to a file in your project, and that'll be entirely fine for this lesson. Now, let me show you the quick API first. We can do this in two, or actually a few different ways. I'll show you two. My favorite is the session helper function. Now, I can write to the session like so by giving it an array. This translates to using whatever driver we specified, in this case, the file driver, I want to put to the session a key of name and a value of John Doe. Now remember, if 100 different people access our application and hit this route, they're not going to share the same session data, of course. Session data, naturally, is unique to the current user's session. But I find this can sometimes be confusing for newcomers, understanding the difference between a user session and caching, for example, which is not user-specific. Anyways, this is how we put to the session, and if we later need to fetch or get from the session, I can use this syntax here. So this means look into the session and give me the value associated with this key. All right, so let's try it out. I'm going to load this page. It should put something in the session and then just return a hello welcome page. So if I give this a refresh, we've now placed it in the session. And if I comment it out, let's return whatever we fetched. All right, so I'll come back, refresh, and now you can see, even though the web is stateless, because we put this data into the session, we were able to fetch it on subsequent page loads. Now, what about the instance where there is nothing in the session? So for example, if I said foobar here, there is no key called foobar. So if I come back and refresh, I don't get anything at all. So in these situations, if you need to, you can always provide a default of whatever is appropriate. Refresh, and now we didn't find anything called foobar, so we returned this value instead. Okay, and that's the basic API you need to know. Provide an array to put something into the session, and then provide a string to get from the session. Now, there are other things you can research. For example, you can push to an array if the key happens to be that. You can pull from an array. You can forget from the session. So if I just want to delete name, I could do that as well. Okay, so that's the helper function. Alternatively, if you prefer, you can fetch it off of the request. So I'm going to import Illuminate HTTP request. And now if I want to access the user's session, I can say session get name. Or let's do this one. Put foobar is Baz. Okay, let's come back, give that a refresh. All right, we now have foobar in the session. So this time, let's simply return request session get the key or the value associated with foobar. Refresh, and now we get Baz once again. And the same is true. I can provide a default here if we fetch something that does not exist, as you see there. Okay, that's the basic API, all you need to really know there. Now again, if you're unfamiliar, I think you might often find yourself reaching for this when you're dealing with multi-step forms. So maybe the user fills out a form, but then maybe like a wizard, they need to switch to another page and continue filling out the form. Well, you don't want to lose all of the input that they provided on the last page. So if the web is stateless and you redirect to a new page, these are things you need to think about. How can I hold on to the information and the input the user provided while redirecting them to a new page? So again, there's many different ways you can do it, some that don't even require the session. But another option is to say request and I'm going to flash all of the input from the last request to the session. This is sort of our way of saying, okay, we've submitted a form. I have that data. I'm just going to flash it. I want to save it for one more page load. And then after that new page, we will delete it entirely. That's an option. So with that in mind, let's talk about flash messaging in general. This is useful for providing quick feedback to the user. For example, you create a project or you create a new account, and then when it redirects to a new page, you see a little flash message. You've seen this before, I know it. You see a little message in the bottom right that says, you've created a project, or project now deleted. Just little bits of feedback. Now these are stored in the session, but we don't want them to live forever in the session. We just want them in the session for one new page load, and then we can delete them. So let's give this a shot. Let's say we've been using this idea of projects. So let's say you create a new project. So we'll have an endpoint like that, and we will return a view called projects.create, and I will quickly whip that up. Resources, views, projects, create.blade.php. I don't have a master page, so we're just going to do this super quick. You need to give us, let's say, placeholder project name, or how about the title of the project? And then another one for a text area, and this will be the description of the project. And let's keep it as simple as that. Okay, finally, I need a submit button. So yeah, this is going to look horrible because we don't have any CSS or any styling, but that's okay. You get the basic idea. So if well, you know what, at the very least, this is all going to be inline, won't it? Let's just wrap it in divs to force some spacing here. Don't beat me up, it's good enough. Okay, so if I switch back, there we go, our crappy little form. So when I fill this out, traditionally you'll store this in the database. But once it has been stored in the database, presumably we'll redirect somewhere with the flash message. So let's say submit a post request to projects, and I will provide my CSRF token. All right, so now let's listen for a post request to projects. And here is where we would save the project. We would validate the project. And you've learned all of this. And I do recommend do this on your own. Get yourself in the habit of trying these out and building little toy apps that serve no purpose other than to get your fingers into that workflow. Anyways, assuming we have saved the project, let's flash a message to the session. I can say session flash message, your project has been created. And then finally, I will redirect back to, how about the home page? All right, does this all make sense? We have one route to load the create page. This has a very crappy form here, and when you fill it out, it will submit a post request to the project's endpoint. That will hit this route where we fictionally save the project, and then we flash a message to the session. And again, the difference between this, your project, you get the idea. The difference between this and this is that this will store it for the lifetime of the user session. Whereas with this one, you're storing it for a single request. We don't need to keep telling the user their project was created, minutes later and 8 page views later. We only want to show it on the following page load, which would be the home page. And I will load a page called welcome, and let's visit it. And right here, we'll just say, we can access it here, or you can do it through the controller. So we could say, if session has a message for the user, then let's spit it out. Like so. So think about it. If we visit the home page, we don't have a message for the user, so we don't see anything at all. However, let's make a new project. We create it. It gets saved to the database, or at least in real life it would, but then we flash a message to the session. That means this bit of data will exist for the next page load. So when we redirect to the home page, we do have something in the session called message. So when we do this check, we fetch it. Now though, if I give it a refresh, it's gone. And that's what we expected. When you flash it, it only will remain for the next request unless you choose to reflash it. So this is something you'll get into the habit of all the time. When you need to provide little bits of feedback to the user, you can flash a message to the session. You could even set up little helpers for yourself if you want. So you could say function flash, and then that will simply defer here. We'll flash a message, and then we can update this. Okay, so now you could simply say, if you want, just to make it a little bit more streamlined, validate the project, persist it, then flash a little message for the user, and redirect where you need to go. Anyways, that's an option that you might consider, especially for standard Flash messaging. You don't want to have to remember the key for every single controller where you might flash. So yeah, you could store it as a helper function here. You could put it on a parent controller. That way in any actual controller, you could say this flash. That would be an option as well. What else? Oh yeah, not to overwhelm you with choices, but you could even do this if you want. As part of your redirect call, you can add a flash message. So you could say with message like this. So yeah, again, not to overwhelm you with choices. Just know for any given task, there's a number of ways to do it in Laravel. Anyways, this is an option I will often reach for as well. But I also like this approach, nice and readable. So if you do want to stick with this helper option, let's have some bonus credit or points here. If I go to my composer.json file, you'll see right here, this is how Composer autoloads your files. And you'll see that we're using a PSR4 convention. That's just a autoloading standard and convention. There's also one for class map. So what this means is autoload all of the classes within database seeds and database factories, which means any of these classes are instantly available to my entire application. Now, if I switch back, another option is to autoload a set of files. So this can be useful if you have a helpers file that you'd like to autoload. Okay, well, we could store that within really anywhere you want. It could be in resources, it could be in app. It doesn't really matter. We'll store it within app. Okay, so now we're saying we want Composer to autoload this helpers.php file. Let's go ahead and create it. And now I will take this helper function and switch it over here. All right. So now, if I switch back, this isn't going to work just yet, but let's see it in action. So if we flash something to the session, notice we get call to an undefined function flash. And that's because we've updated our composer.json file, but we haven't done anything yet. We just changed the file. We haven't created a new Composer autoload file. So for example, if we go to Composer, you'll see some of these files are generated automatically. So we need to recompile. If I run Composer, you'll see there is a dump autoload. That's the one we want. Composer dump autoload. So now you can see we have a new set of autoload files. And in fact, if we open up autoload files, we should now see a reference to helpers.php. There it is. All right, so we now have a helpers file we can use. Again, be thoughtful, don't go crazy with it, but a few select helper functions, whatever people might say, I find to be incredibly useful. Okay, so we build up a new project, and there you go. You have a new Flash message that will only exist for that single page request, and then it's gone after that. Okay, so that's basically the essentials of what you need to know. Do note that Laravel provides a session component to you, and this is used to maintain state about a user from page to page.